Greetings and welcome to The Real Deal on competitive Overwatch. I'm going to be telling you what competitive Overwatch actually is and how it can be properly analyzed. No bullshit, no propaganda, no nonsense. None of the stuff you're likely to hear on Overwatch Central or Unit Found, Terrible British Gaming, aka Stylosa, Unit Lost, Great British Gaming, and all these other propagandist channels that will tell you all you need to do is work hard, be positive, blah, 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 tips to climb ranks. All of that is, though not entirely, the majority of it is bullshit. Now, before I actually talk about competitive Overwatch, there's no way I can avoid this topic because competitive Overwatch is effectively what we call the gambler's fallacy, or it is an exercise in the gambler's fallacy. Now, what is the gambler's fallacy? Maybe some of you know, maybe some of you don't. But for the purposes of this video, I think it would be helpful to read off a definition to you. So we'll read off that definition and we will proceed with the analysis of the gambler's fallacy in life and then consequently Overwatch competitive. The gambler's fallacy, also known as the Monte Carlo fallacy, or the fallacy of the maturity of chances, is the mistaken belief that if something happens more frequently than normal during some period, it will happen less frequently in the future, or that if something happens less frequently than normal during some period, it will happen more frequently in the future, presumably as a means of balancing nature, in situations where what is being observed is truly random, i.e. independent trials of a random process. This belief, though appealing to the human mind, is false. This fallacy can arise in many practical situations, although it is most strongly associated with gambling, where such mistakes are common among players. Now, I'm going to pitch the argument to you that competitive Overwatch is an exercise in the gambler's fallacy. But why does the gambler's fallacy appeal to people? Well, the gambler's fallacy allows the human mind to infer positive outcomes where there are none. It allows the human mind to circumvent the possibility of negative outcomes in a truly random process. And I'm going to argue here that competitive Overwatch is a truly random process. It is an act of randomness to participate in competitive Overwatch. Now, the gambler's fallacy is really pertinent here because if people's instincts were true, that is, inferring greater frequency or lesser frequency, and we should be clear about this, greater frequency is inferred when good things happen and lesser frequency is inferred when bad things happen. Let's give a concrete, before I want to talk about casinos, but an example from competitive Overwatch. If you're on a win streak of, say, 3 or 4 wins, you wouldn't infer naturally, based on your human biases, that this will happen more frequently. If you're on a negative streak and you continue, you're on your 4th loss, you will assume that this will cease happening based on the gambler's fallacy. Casinos run on this principle. If the process of gambling, whether it's pulling slot machines or engaging in blackjack or any number of card games, did not have severe elements of randomness, casinos would simply shut down because they wouldn't be able to make a profit. Very few people take home massive earnings. It does happen, just like some people win the lottery, but it's very rare. We're talking about statistical averages here and the likelihood of things happening. And in a random process, there's no way ultimately to predict the outcome. And when you listen to big gaming channels or bigger gaming channels talk about competitive Overwatch, they're applying the gambler's fallacy. Now, some of them might not believe it. A lot of these channels are pretty propagandist. I think Stylosa is one of these guys. Hey guys, leave a comment, that guy. And there's some others. But the reality is, if you enter into competitive Overwatch, you are instantly thrown into a mix of incredibly random elements. That's particularly true of solo queue, but it's not exclusive to solo queue, which is to say, even a 6-man queue can have you end up in a bunch of hot water in this regard. But of course, the fewer players you're playing with, the more random it is. Now, let's say you have a 3-man queue. You know the people pretty well, they fulfill their roles. One's really good at support, the other is really good at tanking, the other is really good at offense. Right? Now, you go into a game with your individual capacities, and you will be paired off with 3 other people. Note, you have absolutely no control over the quality of those people. Will they use their microphones? Will they communicate? Are they assholes? Are they trolls? Are they competent? Do they suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect? Do they believe they're competent when they're not? Can they actually contribute? You're rolling the die, right? And you are forced to deal with the results of the die. And I mean, we're talking about a six-man game. The analogy isn't too far off. One die and has six different heads. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's particularly true of solo queuing. So the problem here really is that you're stuck with these random elements you have no control over. Now, despite what people claim, the vast, vast majority of people cannot carry an Overwatch game all by themselves. And why is that? Well, it is possible theoretically if you're really, really good and the enemy team is really bad in their totality. But let's say everyone in your team sucks and you're the only good player, or there are only 2 good players and the enemy team has 5 good players, only 1 sucks. Well, that's going to balance it out. There's only so much you can do as a single player. Some characters are, of course, more effective than others. A good McCree can do a lot, a good Zarya can do a lot. But ultimately, you are thrown into a cauldron of random elements that you have no control over. Now, people will tell you a different story, but that is just, once again, this is the gambler's fallacy. This is a very natural tendency humans have to appeal to emotion and things that make them feel good rather than accepting reality as it is. So what does this mean in concrete terms? Well, since we're talking about averages, most of your games will, at the end of each season, the vast majority of people will have won approximately 50% of their games and lost 50% of their games, thus ensuring an absolute minimal amount of movement upwards. And most people will be stuck somewhere in the middle. Now, you can always say, well, you can train yourself and improve yourself, but once again, no matter how good you get, there's always some risk of getting any number of random elements. Yesterday, I played with a Torbjorn who insisted on playing offensive Torbjorn on, the day before yesterday, Hanimura. He set up his Torbjorn in front of the choke point where it was destroyed multiple times, and the only sound you could hear from that Torbjorn was the rather sad and pathetic explanation of my turret, right? So you don't have control over these people, and these people can throw games for you. One really bad player can throw an entire game, and it does happen more frequently than you think. And then there are players who aren't deliberately bad, but just don't know what they're doing. They don't understand strats, counters. I just played a match that was absolutely pathetic. We lost to a decent Hanzo. Now, I play Winston pretty well, but I was on support at the time. I said, I can switch to Winston. Somebody needs to take over support. No one's willing to do that. I hesitated. I didn't switch. I should have changed to Winston despite having only 1 support. But the issue here, of course, was that these guys, they said, Hanzo OP. No, he wasn't OP. A good D.Va or Winston would have taken him out. I could have taken him out. I know this. But nobody switched. People tend not to use their brains. They don't think about strategies, counters. Communication can be really poor. And there are all these other factors. There's the problem in what I call the Holy Trinity, right? The Holy Trinity of offense, support, or healing and tanking. More often than not, most games are lost because the offense is inoffensive. I call it the inoffensive offense problem. They can't get kills. You end up playing Zarya or Reinhardt, and you end up with gold eliminations at the end, or something like that. I've even played matches where I end up with gold eliminations as Ana. They're pretty sad affairs. Now, that's not the tank's role, to get massive eliminations, and it's certainly not a support's role, but that's what happens. And these are all these elements of randomness being thrown in there, and you have no control over it. You have no control whether people will listen or not. So, I'll give you another example. I have played multiple games, not myself, but observed multiple games. I was participating in them, where somebody tries Symmetra on the first point of defense. Well, I noted the losses down each time. This was a while back, and of something somewhere between 30 and 40 games. I don't have it in front of me. I calculated an approximate 90% of the time. It was a little bit higher, actually. 90% of the time, the teleporter was destroyed by a Tracer, Genji, or even a Winston. So, teleporter useless. Symmetra's main function disappears into the ether, and you have nothing left. Now, I base this on a large number of games. I came up with a statistical average, and I try to explain this to people, and they don't listen. People aren't analytical; they don't think about these things. There's a reason why Blizzard is trying to rework Symmetra's kit. It's because she's at the moment garbage and not a reliable choice. All of these people would have been more useful if they had played a Lucia just standing there healing people, or even better, a Mercy with a res with constant single target healing. But they wanted to play their Symmetra because they were so convinced. So half of them say, I'm godlike with Symmetra. I always get it. It doesn't seem to work when I'm there. And I'm talking about probabilities here. It has worked 10% of the time. Partially before it was destroyed. I think we got 3 or 4 people in via the teleporter. Then Genji destroyed it. But what we're dealing here is with a human psychological weakness. And, those of you who know me, I do talk about this all the time. Human psychology is riddled with all sorts of incongruous biases that have nothing to do with reality, that were simply, effectively congenital. The gambler's fallacy is a congenital deficiency of the human mind. There's no doubt about that. When you're actively striving to infer positive outcomes, when it's clear that things are random. Now, it's interesting. The interesting thing about the gambler's fallacy is that they tried to fix the gambler's fallacy. Here, I'll give you an example. I'm reading this off Wikipedia. The gambler's fallacy is a deep-seated cognitive bias and therefore very difficult to eliminate. For the most part, educating individuals about the nature of randomness has not proven effective in reducing or eliminating any manifestations of the gambler's fallacy. Participants in an early study by Beach and Swanson, 1967, were shown a shuffle deck of index cards with shapes on them, and were told to guess which shape would come next in a sequence. The experimental group of participants was informed about the nature and existence of the gambler's fallacy, and were explicitly instructed not to rely on run dependency to make their guesses. The control group was not given this information. Even so, the response styles of the two groups were similar, indicating that the experimental group still based their choices on the length of the sequence. Clearly, instructing individuals about randomness is not sufficient in lessening the gambler's fallacy. But what is the common wisdom on YouTube, lords and ladies and gentlemen? The common wisdom concerning competitive Overwatch is that if you work hard, if you're positive, if you communicate, and you keep on playing games, there you go, long sequence, you will eventually climb that ladder and ascend to whatever rank you deserve to be at. No element of randomness there. Eventually you'll get there. Force Gaming advocated this position. That is the epitome of the gambler's fallacy. Now, Force Gaming isn't the guy is not very bright. I mean, I don't expect him to know these things, and I don't expect him to analyze these things in the proper way. Who knows if he believes it himself. But that is a textbook example of participating in a random process, at the same time also advocating engaging in the gambler's fallacy. If you work hard, positive, and communicate, and you keep on playing, that is repetition, sequence, frequency, eventually you will have a more positive outcome as opposed to a negative one. Or at the very least, you won't fall within the averages. But averages are there for most people to fall within. Now, my motivations for doing this, I'm not really bitter, but it's just something that I've observed repeatedly, acutely. Whether it comes to trolls, people who can't get kills, even support. You'd be surprised the number of people who can't play support. Now, I play a lot of Ana. I have probably about 140 hours with her. At this point in time, I really know what I'm doing with her. And sometimes this season I played a lot of Reinhardt. I need a good Ana with me if I'm playing Reinhardt. Ana plays, I don't get pocket healing. She's sniping people instead when I'm right next to her at half health. I mean, there's not much you can do in the heat of the moment to correct people's behavior, and they don't listen to you half the time. Why should they? You're just a random guy to them. Now, I will agree that when you have a 6-man team, there's a lesser degree of randomness, but you're still not always sure of your individual teammates' capabilities and what they're able to do and what they're not able to do, or for that matter, the enemy teams. There's a degree of randomness there. Yesterday, I got paired with a guy who was unranked with no experience in competitive, and this is after hundreds of matches. How did that happen? When needless to say, he was able to contribute nothing, and we lost rather painfully. Tried to carry it, but 6-man versus 5-man doesn't always work. So that's the nature of competitive Overwatch. It's like the casino. Casinos exist because most of the time you lose or you just break even. You're not going to win most of the time. And just like competitive Overwatch, most people will not climb because of degrees of randomness, their own incompetence. I'm not perfect. I can't do everything. There probably is some element of that there too. But I pay attention to my mistakes. The people I play with pay attention to things I'm doing. And if I make a mistake, I'll admit it. I say, I made a mistake there. My apologies. I'm conscientious about this. But, and I've seen people, offensive Torbjorn guy, the troll, with diamond ranking. I've come very close to diamond this season, but I'm stuck in platinum. So, well, you just deserve to be there. Well, maybe, maybe not. There's been an inflationary expansion of Annas out there. Last season, there were about 17,000. And I made it at my height, I think the top 2 or 3%. I've been knocked down significantly because now they're about 90,000, but I'm still in the top 10%. I'm good with her, but that's not enough. I'm pretty good with a bunch of others too. I'm pretty good with Zarya, pretty good with Reinhardt, quite good with Lucio. I'm pretty good with Winston. I can play a wide variety of characters. I'm flexible, but it just doesn't help. You can train yourself till you're blue in the face and get as good as you can possibly imagine, but the randomness will always afflict you. So what happens when the people have positive experiences within the framework of randomness? Well, it does happen, and these people then take home their positive experiences in a form of confirmation bias that the gambler's fallacy is not real and doesn't apply to them. You see a lot of these people. And of course, if you get to the master's, there are elements that will be eliminated. You get to master's level, people will communicate. They're not going to troll probably, but there's still a strong degree of randomness. So effectively, Blizzard is running a casino. You might be really good at playing cards, but the house has the advantage. And the same thing is true of competitive Overwatch. And when you do win, you're rewarded with that dopamine high that gets you going again and again. And when you lose, you fall prey to the gambler's fallacy. You're thinking this isn't going to happen all the time because X, Y, Z, whatever. That is the truth about competitive Overwatch. Slowly but surely making my peace with this. I probably won't get to diamond this season. Even though I play with people on occasion that I know for a fact and other people confirm I'm better than they are, but they're in diamond. How? Well, they ended up on the luckier end of things. That's how. I just say that matter-of-factly. So, a bit of a rant, but I think it's important that we be aware that random processes are just that. They're random. I could get lucky. Next season, I could get my placement ranks, I could get carried to high diamond. I actually think technically I should be a low diamond. That's my actual skill level, but whatever. It's possible, but it's also possible you'll have horrific placement. You can mitigate this to some degree, but you will always be at the mercy of the RNG, because that's what it is, just random number generation. Which team gets the greater idiots? You're going to have the worst idiots, you're going to have the more competent people, incompetent people, people who talk, people who don't. That's what it all comes down to. That's it. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. By the way, this footage was not, this footage was certainly not competitive. I'm just messing around here. But I will check you out later. Quite possibly on the RNG gambler's fallacy-ridden battlefield of competitive Overwatch. And you have a very pleasant week wherever you might be. Signing out here, the Lord of Losing Competitive. Take care.